Hey, welcome back. So I'm still in this string of really obscure films that came out with ambiguous release dates that I couldn't previously find. So I found this one from Brazil, O Hombre Lobo, which means the Wolfman. Although it is not a remake of 1941's Wolfman, it is certainly inspired by that film. So, let's talk about Brazil for a minute. We have never talked about a Brazilian film on this channel before, because there are very few Brazilian horror films from this era. In fact, the very first Brazilian horror film was from the 1960s, and I think the whole decade had fewer than 10 Brazilian horror films. Now, depending on what metric you're using, the most popular Brazilian horror film is also from the 1960s, and the title translates to "At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul." And that, depending on what you're reading, well, actually, let's put it this way: no matter what source you go off of, it is the first all Brazilian horror film. There was one other film that was a co-production with the United States that had actual known American actors, but it was a Brazilian co-production that came before it. But the first all Brazilian horror film is At Midnight I'll Take Your Soul, and it was I'm gonna talk about that more in another video because it spawned this character called Zé de Caixão, which means Coffin Zay, also known as Coffin Joe in other countries. And that character has appeared in over half a dozen films across 6 decades, maybe 7, and technically is the longest running horror character in human history. So I watched the very first one of these films, which I mentioned, just to see where Brazilian horror really got started, and that is a messed up movie, but that character and that director appear in the early 70s, so I'm going to do a whole video on that later. Anyway, a few years later, this came out. Now, this either came out in 1970, 1971, or 1972, depending on which source you use, although more sources say 71 than the other 2 years. So we're going to go with that, plus it's in the middle. So we're kind of like taking the average here. No release date, just a year, and the year is inconsistent. This poster is pretty interesting. It looks like the words were hand drawn with a marker or a paintbrush of some sort, and the rest of the poster is just photos from the film. Now let's take a look at this. All right, look at this wolf man. All right, first of all, I'm gonna say this. Every single wolf man from every single werewolf movie looks cool, including this guy. That's just my opinion, but I think every single werewolf looks cool. I've never seen a really bad looking werewolf, and this might be the worst one, but still looks cool. It's certainly not just like a guy with, regular makeup on. I mean, that is full facial applications of hair, and he's got the hands too. So anyway, whoops, that was too small. So what's going on in this movie? Well, first of all, unfortunately for me and for everyone, the only version of this movie I could find is in Portuguese, and it is a ripped, probably VHS, definitely VHS rip onto YouTube. It's in Portuguese, but now, and I don't think this was an option like 2 years ago when I started this channel, or maybe 3 years ago at this point, but now you can have YouTube auto-generate subtitles and auto-translate them. So even though nobody actually put the English subtitles officially onto this video, I could auto-generate and auto-translate them. And also, I like kind of understand Portuguese to a mild degree. And so between the auto-generated, auto-translated subtitles and my own understanding, and the fact that I don't think this plot is very complex, I watched it. So I don't feel super comfortable giving it an actual rating, but let's put it this way. If I were to not judge the dialogue or the acting, and I only judged the visuals, the cinematography, the action, the makeup, the violence, the horror elements, if I only judged those things, I would say on the highest possible, like if all the acting is great and the dialogue is cool and makes sense, I would still only give this a 4 out of 10. And if the dialogue is poor and the acting is poor, I would give this a 1 out of 10. It is definitely one of the worst movies I've ever seen, except I can't say that in true confidence because I didn't actually experience the full dialogue. But let's put it this way. It's called The Wolfman, and you see the Wolfman for maybe like a minute, maybe a minute and a half total of the hour and a half runtime. There is almost no Wolfman in this movie, so that right there is a big problem. So it basically feels like a soap opera. What happens is we got a few main characters. We have the main character, the main man is named Rodrigo, and he is a professor, I believe a college professor, because the only student that we meet here is Rodrigo's student that's a woman. He's also having an affair with the woman, and she's definitely an adult. This is her. Her name is Marcia, okay? So that's Marcia right there. Okay, so we have Rodrigo. This is him with the white hair, which, by the way, from what I understand from what the poster says, this may have originally played in color, but the version that I watched was in black and white. So we do have a bunch of color pictures here, but the YouTube version is in black and white. Also, if you look at the wolf here, this image of the Wolfman is in black and white, so that's a little bit confusing. So I don't know if these are just promo pictures that are in color or if the whole thing originally was in color. I thought maybe it said on this poster that it was in, if it was in color or not, although now I'm not seeing it. So I think maybe it was in black and white. Actually, some of these pictures over here are in black and white. So I don't know. Anyway, speaking of black and white versus color, the whole movie is the quality of an early 40s monogram film, if you've ever seen monogram films. If not, Monogram Films was a Poverty Row studio in Hollywood in the 40s. And like Bela Lugosi did a bunch of films for them, and they're all of poor quality. They range from okay to bad. This felt like that. It was inspired by an early 40s movie. I don't know if they were going intentionally for an early 40s feel or not, but the film is not set in the early 40s. Anyway, back to the characters. Besides Rodrigo and Marcia, we also have Roberto, which is Rodrigo's adopted son. And we also have Rodrigo's wife, whose name, I think it was Maria. It might have been Maria. Or it might have been Marta, something like that. I do remember, I'm pretty sure it started with an M because I remember there was Marcia and Maria, I think. Anyway, those are the four main characters. There's also like a police chief. I think that's this guy here. He's a police inspector. And basically, there's a werewolf on the loose. You almost never see him. And the other thing is that Rodrigo is having an affair with Marcia, even though he's married. He's having an affair with his student. There's also an old woman in this film, and she kind of like, if I'm not mistaken, tells Rodrigo that he needs to resign his position because he's having a relationship with one of his students, or maybe his only student. And basically, there is a point, I'll give you a little spoiler now, although I highly recommend you don't bother watching this film because it was not enjoyable at all. Maybe if you speak Portuguese, you might like it more because you might catch something I didn't catch. That's definitely possible. Anyway, here's a spoiler. There's a part where you see a werewolf, and yeah, I don't really think you see him get attacked, but after there's some kind of altercation with the werewolf, Rodrigo goes to the doctor because he's been shot in the chest by a gun. And so I believe at that point we are supposed to assume that Rodrigo is the werewolf. I certainly thought that. And he will not tell the doctor how he got shot. And the doctor said he's required, I assume by Brazilian law, to report any gunshot wound to the police. And Rodrigo begs him not to do that. And he says, well, you're going to have to explain this. And Rodrigo says, well, it's a long story. And then it like fades out of the scene. So you don't hear the story. So you assume that he's going to tell the doctor the story of how he became a werewolf, but you don't get to hear that. Well, you know, I guess this is kind of good, but at the end of the movie, it turns out he's not the werewolf. It's actually his adopted son who's the werewolf. Also, I'm pretty sure that the adopted son is in love with Marcia, who is having an affair with that guy's father, which is her teacher. And so both father and son both like the same woman. The woman is probably like 19 years old. Also, Rodrigo's wife like really likes him, and it's kind of sad for her, although I could have missed something there. And it turns out that Roberto is actually the werewolf, and Rodrigo ends up killing him at the end, even though that's his adopted son. He kills his own adopted son because his adopted son is a werewolf, although I'm pretty sure that Rodrigo knew he was a werewolf the entire time. But then again, I could be wrong because maybe the subtitles failed me on that. So basically, I mean, there is a little plot twist at the end. So let's not give it a 1 out of 10, but somewhere between a 2 and a 4 out of 10 is where this one's going to fall. It is kind of interesting to me to see a Brazilian horror film because now I've only seen 2 in my whole life. And these are both very early Brazilian horror films. There was nothing before the 60s, and this is the early 70s. So, you know, I'm not mad that I watched it, but it's not that good. I mean, it's mostly just a lot of talking. You don't see much werewolf action. I mean, it could have been good, but it really wasn't. So that's it. Now, unless something changes, I only have one more old, obscure 1971 film to do after this, and then I can get back into 1972 and get back into quite a number of more popular, probably much higher quality films. So we're coming up to that. All right, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.